Hello and welcome to the Coder Kids podcast. We're here again, Jeff Ward, founder of Coder Kids, along with my co-host, James Thornock.
That's right.
Welcome. And this is episode 30 of the Coder Kids podcast. And this is a podcast where we talk about technology topics for parents. In this episode specifically, we are breaking down homeschooling. So if you're a homeschool parent, this is going to be particularly interesting to you. We're talking about coding, technology, and homeschooling in general. With an expert on homeschooling, Melissa Brander from Pocket Homeschool.
For sure. And this is an episode that's great to listen to if you're not into homeschooling too. There's a lot of good principles throughout.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it while we were interviewing her because I'm not a homeschool parent, but I do want, I want my child to learn and grow in kind of, I don't know, just maybe a little bit unorthodox ways. I don't think that sending your child to public school and calling it a day is necessarily like sufficient in today's world. I just want him to be creative and to be thinking outside the box and things. So it's a really great episode, I think, for that.
Excellent. So do you have any personal updates you'd like to share with us, Jeff?
Well, James, I think you should take the personal update because it's been a crazy week in Houston.
It's been a heavy week for the country. But it definitely impacted us hard at the Thornock home. So here we our pipes burst and they froze and they burst because we had old galvanized piping from 1979 and so fortunately we didn't get any serious damage, but that's gonna be a lot of fun to repair. We were out of power for over 2 days, and with y'all hear about me talk all the time about my kid, but it's one thing if you're an adult and you can just kind of hunker down and under the covers, but it's totally another when you're running around with a kid. And we fortunately had a family that from our church that reached out and housed us for 3 days, and that really meant the world. So if you're struggling out there, or someone that's struggling, lift the hand, help people when you can, and it means a lot. And sometimes we're on the giving end and sometimes we're on the receiving end. That's the short version. That's the short
I felt a little bad because all the people in Texas, they got the snowstorm and the power went out. My parents are in Dallas and they had a terrible week where the power was off and on, and we're freezing at night, and then I we got tons of snow, but what is tons of snow if your power stays on? It's a pretty easy challenge. But we probably got somewhere like 13 to 15 inches of snow up here. So it was cool. We actually went sledding and had a lot of fun. So it was totally different experience.
Yeah, absolutely wild. So like my family's not in this house right now. Like I've got it all to myself. But it's because the house is broken. It doesn't have water anywhere. So I came to record the podcast, and then I'm going to be going back to my parents' house. So, all right, without further ado, we'll do that fun transition noise. All right, welcome to the interview portion of the podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Melissa Brander. She is a longtime homeschooling mom of 2 who runs Pocket Homeschool, a website dedicated to helping parents homeschool with joy and confidence. While technology doesn't always come naturally to her, she is committed to learning more and helping her kids learn as well. So welcome to the podcast. This will be fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
We haven't had someone who is a homeschool parent, which is why we're excited to have you on. And not only are you a homeschool parent, but you're also kind of talking to a lot of people in the homeschool community, it sounds like, and kind of trying to share best practices and things like that. So we kind of wanted to talk about, specifically, you said that your kids have learned a bit of coding, even though you're not necessarily an expert. Can you tell us a little bit about the background of how you got your kids into coding and also like how you decided to do homeschooling in the first place?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, deciding to homeschool, that's like a really personal decision. Like every homeschool family, they have their own story and their own reasons. For us, it really had to do a lot with flexibility of our schedule and what we taught our kids, and just having a lot of choices open to us. And as far as coding goes, well, first I must admit, I am not the most tech-minded. My husband, he's a lot more tech-minded than me, but even I could recognize that there is going to be a lot of need for these skills in the future in the world that we already live in. Like I grew up with like limited technology, not like in a sense where I didn't have access to it, but like at the time, like we were just using computers to like play Oregon Trail and
Classic.
like classic, right? And I wrote on my Zanga, right? But I couldn't have imagined the way that technology would be such a part of our everyday lives. Like it was cool, but it was sort of still kind of a novelty. And now technology is everywhere, and giving our kids those kinds of skills is really important. And I think too that you just have to sort of like look around at what skills are out there. And there's so many benefits to coding that it teaches you so much more than the technology skills. And so it's really useful for a lot of things.
Yeah. It is actually kind of interesting when I think back to my education in the 90s. If I would have known then what I know now about how technology has exploded, how we're all like on phones, how we use it for everything, I definitely would have more seriously, because I took like computer science in high school and things, but I definitely would have more seriously considered studying computer science in college, because and I went to the first day of computer science in college and they were like, this is going to be a really challenging course. And I was like, no, I'm out. Which I regret that now. But I guess my point is, it's amazing. To your point, it's amazing how it's really expanded. It's flourished so much. And yeah, like, back in my day, we just used it for games and having fun and trying to like hack the computers in school, but everything has come such a long way.
Yeah, for sure.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's just incredible the way that technology has changed and the way that our society has changed. And part of teaching our kids these skills, is so that they will hopefully be able to adapt to whatever is next, right? I can't imagine what the world is going to be like when they're adults, just in the way that we couldn't have imagined the way things are like when we were kids.
Yeah, it's true.
So I want to follow up on what you said about kind of freedom of choice in terms of content and schedule. I mean, you mentioned both of those. So obviously, one of the subjects that you chose was coding. What's your opinion on that mindset, that flexibility mindset? Do you feel like it's important for them to, so I'm asking a little bit, I guess, about your philosophy. Do they need to be flexible and kind of adapt to the world around them? I'm guessing, like, I guess I'm trying to ask, like, why is it important for them to have flexibility in their education?
That's a great question. I think, like, I know I was listening to your recent episode with Allison Master, and she talked about the growth mindset, and that is such an important part of what we do. I mean, I'll admit, as a kid, like, I grew up and I was like that type A perfectionist kid, and it's hard when you're a type A perfectionist kid and you grow up to be a type A perfectionist adult. Like, the world is not built for that. The world is not built for that.
Oh, man.
And so I think that for kids, if you can give them that flexibility, they'll be able to do so much more in their lifetime. And with coding, like, not just the flexibility, but the problem solving skills, being able to think through cause and effect and the sequence of events and how things build on each other, all of those are really important critical thinking skills that you can use not just in coding, but in other areas of your life.
Yeah, it's really good. Man, that's a really good answer. I'm vigorously nodding my head. So for those of you just listening to the podcast, all agreement over here. Go ahead, Jeff.
So were you homeschooled yourself, or did you go through the public school system?
I went to private school my whole K
Oh,
through
okay.
12 education, so I was never homeschooled. My husband was homeschooled for a few years when he was a kid, but if you had asked me when I like first had kids if I had ever imagined that we would be homeschooling, I would have been like, no, kids went to school. It's what I did. It's what kids do, right?
Yeah.
But my kids have never been to school and they've been homeschooled their whole lives. So it kind of sort of, you can't know what you don't know when you're young. And then later on, you make decisions. And now I can't imagine doing the opposite. I can't imagine doing anything else with them.
One other, sorry, James, I was just going to say one other episode you might be interested in listening to is our episode with the people from Acton Academy, Jesse and James. You remember her name? James has a worse memory than me.
Yeah. You're asking the guy with the bet.
Man. But anyway,
Cardenas.
They're super awesome.
Yeah.
And
is it Emily? Goodness gracious.
We're not going to throw out like a million names and have them all wrong.
No.
We apologize in
Mrs.
advance.
Cardenas.
But anyway,
she's a guide. She's a guide there.
Yeah. So Acton Academy is kind of like a school, but it's like kind of a little bit more along the lines that we're talking about. Like it opens up the door for a lot of creativity and problem solving and things that I feel like in the public school system, you just don't get the time or the patience to like explore. And that's one thing we really have loved about coding is that it's this topic that a lot of people look at it. When you look at the profession of coding, a lot of times it looks like a really kind of boring job. But when you step back and really think about how creative it is, it kind of depends on your tasks. I mean, I imagine that coding software for a semiconductor company might be like very draining, maybe less creative, but there's still an element of creativity and kind of entrepreneurship and ownership that you get out of any time that you do coding. Is that kind of part of your mentality as well?
Yeah, I feel like with coding, it's one of those things where it's used in so many different applications and purposes that we probably don't even think about all the behind scenes. Like we're recording this right now and somebody had to code the software for us to record it and everything like that. And so it's kind of one of those things that's behind the scenes of a lot of the things we do nowadays that we don't think about. I have a background in writing, and writing's like that too. There's lots of different kinds of writing, from more technical writing and creative writing. And it's the same way with coding. There's more technical coding, and then there's the coding of making a game. And so there's a whole wide spectrum of coding projects and coding that exists in the world around us, but we just don't see it.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely. Okay, so to correct myself, it's Allie Cardenas.
Sorry, Allie Cardenas. We love
apologize. But no, you're absolutely right that everything requires this thought and this background and this planning. And I remember taking some creative writing classes, and we approach different subjects differently, and then we also approach different writing styles differently. So like if we're writing poetry, if we're writing short stories, like it's different, right? So if we're writing an audio codec, right, that's recording this microphone sound and then, mixing it into, ones and zeros, and then it comes out as audio on the other side, basically instantaneously. That's amazing. I'm using Discord software. I'm using OBS. I'm using OBS Streamlabs, right? There's all kinds of drivers built by NVIDIA I'm using right now. I mean, I literally couldn't list all of them. So you're absolutely right. There's a ton going on behind the scenes.
And just thinking about yesterday with Perseverance landing on Mars and all the coding work that it took to get it there, and all the people behind the scenes so that everything would go just right, so it would land at just the right time and not be damaged in landing and everything like that. It's such a wide world that we don't realize how many people are behind the scenes working on the coding and the other parts to make everything work.
Yeah.
So a question to kind of follow up with that, I mean, because there's so much, right? Like you, Melissa, cannot know everything, right?
Yes.
And so you expressed, trying to prepare your kids for a world that you don't know what it even like looks like, right?
Yeah.
So this
feel.
Go ahead.
Oh, Sorry. I was going to say it can totally feel overwhelming, especially approaching an area like coding when you don't have a coding background. Like there's all these different terms and language like Scratch and Python and Raspberry Pi. And, I thought that was a food, but it's not a food. And so I'm sure lots
Sounds
of
like
people
it.
have made that joke. That's probably a dad joke, even though I'm not a dad. But
I think it would
James is going to
qualify
put that. He's going to put that in his coffer of dad jokes.
Like, all right, kid, you want to eat some Raspberry Pi? But Dad, it's not dinner time. Don't worry about it, kid.
Anyway.
Wow. Okay, I just interrupted the entire flow of what you were saying. Yeah. So there's this world, and it's hard for us to even imagine. We can imagine some of the things, but it's difficult to prepare them. What are some ways that you help them prepare, even though, like, are there any tools or tricks or software or anything that you use to help teach them in areas that you're not necessarily an expert? Because I feel like a lot of parents struggle with that. My parents struggled with that when they were trying to homeschool me, right? And they did that on and off for 3 or 4 years. And there were so many fewer resources back then. So can you speak to that? A parent who's concerned, like, look, I'm a biochemist. I'm not really a creative writer. So therefore, how are they going to get that? Do I have to be a Renaissance man in order to be able to teach my child everything? Or how does that work? Are you a facilitator? Are you a teacher? Like, what's your role as the parent?
I think as a homeschool parent, it's best to kind of be a little bit of all those things. One part teacher, one part facilitator, and of course the love, which you can't bottle or quantify that at all. But I think when you're approaching a subject that you don't know, it's helpful to start your learning in an area that's familiar with you. So like before we ever touched a computer or coded, we read books about coding because books are familiar to me. They're like a safe way for me to approach a new topic. And there's tons of books about coding for kids. There's even like my first coding books that have like lift the flaps that like kind of walk you through like you're trying to do, here's your mission, and try and figure out the program you're building through these lifting the flaps. And then you can check it if you're right by lifting the right flaps. And so when you start like at a basic level, then you can kind of work your way up to a level that's more, I don't want to use the word intense, but you can work your way towards doing the real thing. And I also think knowing and understanding who has resources for you, who has expertise for you. Like I know you guys both teach coding classes, and so that's a great way to get an intro to. And you can just send your kid to the class, which is great. But if you want to also learn and help them, ask them to show you what they learned in the class and kind of go on this with them. So it's not just like they take a class and they learn things, but if you also want to engage with them in a way to help them keep learning, you need to ask them what they've learned and found out so that you can keep moving along on the next steps and see what level they're at.
Preach.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I cannot say that enough, Melissa. Yeah. When it's so true. When you go and this is true if you're a teacher in the classroom as well. I mean, this is just a principle of education. And that is, if someone learns something, I'm using parentheses here, but they cannot explain it, it's often forgotten, right? If it's not used, then that's just the way our brain works. Look, like we're beings of survival, and so if something's not immediately useful to us, it just goes away. And so exactly what you said, Melissa, with if you want your kid to really be engaged in something, or even just to provide them an outlet to express what they already know, or maybe they want to express that, maybe they want to show off. Like I love to show off. And so Laura knows this. I'll be like, hey, I learned this cool new thing in Adobe Premiere or whatever. And I'll show her. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, but I need that toddler cred. And I think, yeah. So giving them an opportunity to explain and then giving them the space to explain that. Oh, yes. It's beautiful. Okay,
yeah, but
sorry.
Melissa, go ahead, Melissa.
I was gonna say, plus then you know what level they're at. If they take a class and they come back and they're like, this was so hard and confusing and I didn't understand it, then you know you might need to take a step back and find them a more basic class. Or if they come and they're like da 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 da, and it's clear that they've totally got it, then you know that they're ready to move on to the next step. So
Yeah.
not just for their remembering it, but it also helps you as a parent to figure out where they're at and how you can best direct them towards what they can learn next.
It's
Yeah,
really a
and
great it's really a great mentality because a lot of kids will take our class, and we've talked about this in past episodes, but it's like, oh, I did coding this summer. And it's like, well, like learning the piano, you can't really like, oh, I learned the piano this week. It's like, yeah, like you studied it for a week,
chopsticks
but
down. We got
yeah, it's just the beginning of a journey. I mean, coding has to be looked at as a journey, or else it's really like, I don't want to say it's a total waste of money. I mean, at least they got some exposure to it. They got to see if they like it or not. But if you're not going to pursue it for a little bit of time to see if your child actually enjoys it, then it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that I was gonna say it's really trendy, so it's easy to like do it to check it off on your list, right? Like STEM education is really popular, but if you want your child to get more out of it, then you have to view it as more than just a box you check off. You have to be committed to helping them grow and understand it. And maybe that means you learn some things alongside them, which is great because my personal philosophy is that we should all be learning all the time because we will never know anything, like you said earlier.
Yeah. You know, I want to jump back to something you said earlier with, you know, your kid responding and they go da 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 da, right? They understand everything they're showing that. Occasionally, and this will happen with coding, is they'll understand more than you, the parent who's listening to this podcast, and you're like, "Sure, honey, that's great." My, oh man, and so there's a point at which, you know, and this is not going to happen with a 5-year-old child, most likely. But there are parents, and you have some gifted children, and we've worked with some of them, and you know, sometimes you feel at a loss of like, well, what do we do next? And it's and maybe you can speak to this, Melissa, but you know, one of the things we offer is like private tutoring, where you know people who are really experts can help them move forward. We had a parent, her name's Joy, and her son reached out to like apply for one of our jobs. He's 12. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this,
Did you hire him?
he's an intern with us. Yeah. I can't
Wow, that's
legally
awesome.
pay him. Yeah. No, but he is absolutely working with us. And so, I'll be checking in with him. Well, I was going to check in with him this week, and then the Texas freeze happened, or I shouldn't say Texas, but the Great Freeze of 2021, or Winter Storm Uri, or whatever you want to call it. And so every week we check in several times, and he is like legitimately writing curriculum for one of our classes right now. The superpowered. The Scratch superpowered curriculum. So if you want to check those projects out, not released yet. But he is actively working on that, and the reason I say that is Joy came to me because in the interview process, I interviewed, you know, Joy was sitting there right with him, and
Yeah.
I was like, "Are you interested in this? Like, you know, what's your you know, obviously I want you to feel safe as a mom, but what's been your experience?" And she's like, "Well, we've really encouraged him." And then there was a point where I didn't know what he was saying anymore. And he was just like talking over us, and she felt like, hey, I want to support him, but I can't do it knowledgeably anymore, and I need some outlet. And so that's how he started working with us. And so he's been able to continue his learning in a kind of a different avenue. And no one else has done this. Like, we've not had a 12-year-old intern before. In any kind of aspect. But yeah, if there are resources out there. So my question to you, Melissa, sorry for like stealing the show, but like when your child gets to a place that just may exceed your understanding, what kind of resources or tools or maybe people or companies or whatever do you reach out to help continue that learning and kind of foster that that kind of desire to want to know more?
That's a great question. I think like knowing your limits is a really important job. Knowing when you need to step in and say, okay, this goes beyond my understanding. I need to do some research and figure out who else out there can help them teach. Like with the way the internet is, you can be connected to so many different people and so many different ways of learning. Like you can even take like college level courses for free. Like so many universities put their coursework online now for free. So even if you are in an area where you know you are out of your head, if you can say to yourself, okay, if I was learning this for myself, how would I keep learning? What would I look for? And try and find that person or that resource to teach your child, because it all happens to some point. There is no one ultimate teacher who knows everything about everything. I am sure that you guys still learn about coding, even though you do this professionally. Yeah. And so if you are in that growth mindset that we talked about a little bit earlier, then you can recognize that here's an opportunity for your child to continue growing if you can help find them the right resources and support to do so.
Love it. So I know that you have this pocket homeschool business. And so when you are thinking about other homeschoolers and other parents who are maybe interested in getting their kids started with coding, I mean, I'm kind of interested to hear also just what you're aiming to do with pocket homeschool in general. But maybe you could start with that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Okay. Well, I started Pocket Homeschool because it sort of grew out of something I was already naturally doing. Like we had homeschooled for a long time. People would come to me and ask their homeschool questions. And I think kind of like coding, if you're not in the world of homeschooling, it can seem very like overwhelming and kind of stressful to approach and figure out how you do this, especially like when I started, I didn't really know anyone else who homeschooled. I knew a couple people who were homeschooled as kids, but I didn't know any other families who are doing it. And I didn't really have anyone there to help me like get started. I had to do a lot of figuring out on my own, which is fine because I enjoy figuring things out, but I didn't want other people to have to do it alone. I wanted there to be resources and support there for them. And so that's kind of why I started Pocket Homeschool, to give people those resources and support.
That's great. So I guess the follow-up question is, in terms of specifically coding, if you're talking to a homeschool parent or parents in general, and they want to get their kid involved in coding, you mentioned starting out with some books, but like, what are some things that you'd recommend to consider, especially from a homeschool parent perspective, for getting started in coding?
I think it depends a lot on what age your child is. Like it's going to look different with a smaller child than it will with an older child. With an older child who is more independent and ready to sort of like jump into things more independently, I would suggest something like them taking an intro class, like from you guys, or in some way just sort of like starting with having a little bit of time where they can get to learn what it's sort of all about, because they're older and more independent. They might be ready to jump into a class setting right away. But for a younger child, like I said, I mentioned books. There's also games. Like we started with Robot Turtles. I'm sure you guys know about that game. Yeah, so we we started
like
with
15
that
copies
game.
behind me this green screen. There's a lot of Robot Turtles in this room.
So like starting in those ways that are offline first, I think, with younger kids, because especially, it can be intimidating. You don't want to let your child loose with a computer, and like they don't even like there's all these little things about using a computer that they don't know, like working on controlling a mouse and how to type and everything like that. So in some sense, you have to build like those fundamental skills of just how to use a computer first before you can jump into the coding. And I know like for kids who are raised in a digital age, it comes a lot more naturally to them, but you still can't skip one before you get to the other. Everything kind of has to go in the logical progression. And then when you're ready to move beyond sort of using your offline tools, then I think like Scratch is a great place to start. It's very accessible to kids, and it's really easy to sort of see how the pieces fit together there. And then once they're done with that, then they can move on to whatever is the next level, depending on how well they liked Scratch. And just, you can play around with it, or you can explore, or you can take a more focused path. There are like tools and resources out there that will guide you through different projects step by step. So those are sort of like, everything kind of builds logically on each other. Like you start with the like introduction to it as like even being a thing, because kids don't know what coding is unless you tell them. We're not born knowing things are coded. So
love it. You're preaching to the choir on that, because that's pretty much the progression that me and James have decided on as well.
Yeah.
And then
like
from
word for
Scratch,
word.
I mean, once you understand Scratch and you go pretty deep into Scratch, there's so many avenues that you could take that are interesting.
Yeah.
Actually,
and there's so many different things you can do with Scratch too. Like my son built this thing where he made the instruments play all these different noises, and he recorded his own sound effects for the instrument. And then last week he was showing me this game he built where it's a chick that jumps over the egg, and if you land on the egg, then the egg breaks. And so you got to try and not do that.
Nice.
I'm not very good at it.
Premature hatching is a no. Don't do it.
Yes.
That's awesome. That is really incredible. So kind of going back to my own homeschool experience, like let me dig into this a little bit and then follow up with a question, right? So, my mom would basically like sit me down on the couch, and she would either like read to me for an hour, or I would read for an hour. And like, look, there were books on homeschooling back then, but I mean, this was like 4th grade. I mean, it's definitely the 90s, kind of the late 90s. I was being homeschooled. The internet was a thing, kind of. I highly doubt there was a ton of homeschooling presence online. I'm sure there always was a little bit. But the resources that she had available to her, she had a library, like a physical library, which was great. I got to kind of play with my friends. But other than that, I'm trying to think about like different things that she used. There were homeschool groups. I remember they're all like super far away. So if we ever wanted to do something, and I was able to learn things in a format that was like, again, extremely loose, but like someone would teach a class, like just like a lesson on a subject, but I don't think I ever got any follow-up. So this is not to throw any shade your way, Mom. She did a great job. I think I turned out okay human being. And so my question is, the tools that were available in the 90s are, I'm just going to say, not the same as the tools today. So how has it changed, from when I was a kid to what's available now? You've talked about a lot of the resources for coding, but are there, obviously your website is going to be one main answer, right? But what are some other things you would say?
There's just tons of tools out there now. Like previously, homeschooling in the 90s, the demographics was different. And now, not only do we have the internet, but homeschooling is a lot more diverse, and there are a lot more people who homeschool now. So just that kind of has shifted things, in that maybe before there was only a few kinds of resources available, and a lot of people use the same things. But now, basically, if you can think of it, someone has probably written a homeschool program for it. And educational publishers and other ones are starting to realize, like, there is this market if we create products for homeschoolers that we can sell to them. And before, like, there just wasn't enough people to make it necessarily worth it for a lot of publishers to do that as a side project. Like, you either had to be like all in on it, or but now there's just so much out there, and the internet has really expanded things. It's allowed people to connect and create more communities, especially people who live more rurally. Like I live in a decent sized city, so there are lots of homeschoolers here, but there are other homeschoolers who live in more rural areas and they don't have as many opportunities to connect with people. Like you said, they might have to drive a long time to find a homeschool group. And so the internet sort of brings all the homeschooling information you could ever want to your fingertips, and it brings you other homeschoolers and ways to connect with them. There are podcasts. There are probably like 500,000. That's an exaggeration, but there are a lot of homeschool podcasts out there and books and everything, and it's becoming just this great kind of like playground. Honestly, sometimes now I kind of find too many resources and I'm like, this is too many. I can't do all the cool things that I want to do.
So we know that technology is such a blessing, but also can be a bit of a curse. You've got a lot of kids who are maybe a little bit too addicted to technology. Obviously, social media is an interesting topic that we could probably talk about a lot. From your perspective, I mean, what are your thoughts on like screen time or technology use by kids? And how do you kind of like, we've kind of heard how you're using it as a tool.
Yeah.
How would you say you kind of make sure that it doesn't get overused?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because, especially right now, it's winter, there's a pandemic going on, and like it is really tempting some days to just be like, please watch 3 movies and leave me alone. But
we talked about that. Yeah.
Just have to be honest. But I think like sitting down and thinking about what do you want your family life to look like? Because there's certainly a place for screens. We enjoy doing things on screens together. My kids enjoy beating me at Super Smash Brothers, and because they've already outpaced me, as they make abundantly clear to me every time they beat me. And so just like kind of looking at your family and figuring out where technology fits in your family. Like, don't say like technology is, you can take that approach that it's not good, but I don't think that's realistic. It's not the world that we live in. And so I think thinking about how you use technology and how it can add to your family and create meaningful experiences for you has been helpful for us in thinking about how we use technology with our kids.
That's great.
So I'm trying to understand and kind of summarize what you're saying. Are you saying that it really matters just what your goals are, and then okay, so can you walk us through that process of like what kind of questions would you ask yourself or your child in order to get the goal in the first place? Because like you do have to start with the vision, right? Like the vision is like, I want to be like either a happy adult or successful, or maybe I want to be a happy child. It's fine too. It's a good goal. And then so that vision can kind of turn into like, oh, well, I think these things fall within that. And then I think the third step would be choosing technology. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about technology, there's kind of like, there's different kinds of technology. So it's not like it's all necessarily the same. So when you're thinking about that goal for your family and how you use technology, you have to think about the different kinds of technology. Like I remember when I was a kid and I watched a lot of TV, and I think I turned out somewhat okay. Maybe not all the way okay, but I don't think that was TV's fault. I think that like, I know for me, for example, that if I am up really late reading on a screen, I can't fall asleep. So one of the things that we decided about technology is that we are not putting screens in our kids' bedrooms at this point, because we want to encourage them to sleep and not be on the screens for however many hours, because that's tempting even for me as an adult to just like scroll on my phone for like an hour or 2 hours laying in bed, because why not, right? It's not, it's there sometimes, so it's easy for it to be accessible. So in some ways, if you don't think about it and you aren't intentional, it's easy for it to just become this kind of all-encompassing thing, and then you have to try and figure out how to make it less so. In my experience, it's easier to start slow and gradually add than it is to like just let the genie out of the bottle and then try and stuff it somewhat back in. So I think in terms of that, you can always add more later, but it's much harder to take it away. If you're used to like being on a screen for 6 hours every day, it's going to be a lot harder for a kid to come back down from that than it is to gradually increase it. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's called like dopamine stepping, kind of. It's a related idea.
That's what drug users do too, James.
It's this idea that you kind of want to start the day with kind of the most boring activity and then kind of increase it from there so that you're not overwhelmed. I don't know if it's the same thing, but it's related. Yeah. So what questions would you ask yourself, or would you ask your child to come up with those goals?
I think I would ask for me, I think I would ask like, what kind of content do I want my child to be viewing? Is there content that I think they shouldn't be viewing? Like, do I think they shouldn't be viewing overly violent things? And I know like you guys on your YouTube channel, you have a lot of videos about whether or not such and such a game is good for kids. And that can be good for parents to look at and to understand, because I didn't play like Fortnite or Roblox or any of those things growing up. So like I have no idea what they're like. So I think understanding what the technology, like when you're thinking about adding in a piece of technology or a game, you say, what is the purpose of this? And is this going to be something that will be beneficial for my kids and appropriate for my kids? And they don't mean you have to go wild with like saying, no, you can't do this or this and this. But it is good to be aware, because there are so many things out there and not all of them are marketed for kids and not all of them are aimed at kids. So understanding what a game is about, understanding what a TV show is about, and all of that can help you to figure out if that's something you want your child to be engaged with, if that's something that will be good for them. And that's going to look different with a 5-year-old than with a teenager. You know, a teenager is going to have more say and control, and they should be more involved in that decision-making process about what can and cannot be watched and played. You know, have conversations with them. If they want to play a game and you see something concerning, talk to them about it. Whereas with a 5-year-old, you are going to have, it's just a different conversation depending on where your kid's level is at. But I think that thinking about what the tools do, what the games do, what the shows do, and thinking about where your child is, because there's wildly different things. There are things you would show a teenager that you wouldn't show a 5-year-old. And so having an open mind and thinking too, like, okay, I'm saying no to this for now, but maybe in 5 years we'll revisit that and that will be a better fit for them then.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that maturity plays such a important part in what we do, because I think it's easy to say like, oh, you can never do these things because I'm your parent and I'm going to protect you. But I think it's much better in terms of technology to have a conversation to allow your child to like mature with technology and to grow up with technology. Because I think it's too common that people who are very restricted when they're kids grow up and just go crazy.
Yeah.
Just let it loose.
You have to think about the adult that they're going to be someday, and that you could never expose them to technology for the whole 18 years of their childhood, but then you won't have walked alongside them and helped them figure out how to use it appropriately and how to understand it and everything like that. And so you have a chance when your child is young and little to be able to have dialogue about these things and to be able to help them to set healthy limits and use of screen time. And if you ignore that opportunity, eventually they'll be adult and they will do it. And you won't have that opportunity to have those conversations with them then that you might have been able to have when they were younger.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about like technology as a tool and how a lot of people raise their kids to, and again, we're not super parents.
Yeah, for
So
sure not super.
I'm not criticizing anyone. But as a former teacher, especially, I noticed that a lot of kids are raised with the mindset of technology is for fun. Like I use it to watch my videos, I use it to play my games, and technology is for fun. And then they get to school, or they, maybe they're in a homeschool setting, and they're like, well, I don't want to use. Honestly, I'm a bit at this point with my own son because he sees technology as something that's fun, like being on the iPad is fun. And then we'll be like, all right, well, why don't you get on Khan Academy Kids for a little while and like work on that? And he's like, no, because I like doing fun things on the iPad. I don't want to do like learning things on the iPad. And so I know, James, you'll be there soon, man.
Yeah, I'm
But
like,
how
it's gonna be
important it
interesting.
is to teach them that technology, it can be used for fun, but it's also like very important to teach them that it should be a tool for learning, and
Yeah,
it,
it's
it
like,
really supercharges learning.
sorry, I don't mean to keep
No,
jumping in. I'm
you're
just
good.
very
No, I
excited.
mean this
I
is
was
this is
gonna
your
say,
episode, so be all right. Like,
This is your chance, Melissa. Say what you got to say. Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say it's like food, right? You eat food. Sometimes you eat food for fun, but you also want to eat food to give your body the things that it needs. And technology is like that too. Like, is it fun to watch for me to watch like 6 episodes in a row of some TV show that I really love, me as an adult? Yes, it's fun, but is that helping me later on in my life? Am I going to be any anything good come out of those 6 episodes? And I'm not saying don't use technology for fun, because I use technology for fun. But if that's the only way that you're using it, then you're missing out on so many helpful and beneficial things that it can be used for.
That's great.
and all these things that you're telling us and telling the parents who are listening to this podcast, you can also have this conversation with your child, right? And say like, hey, yeah, we use this for fun. We use this for work. We use this for learning. What, and asking them, and this is something my dad did really well. And he said he constantly is a weird word. At least once a month, he asked me what kind of a person I wanted to be. And, having a judgmental father, and I'm using judgmental in a good aspect. So I know that word is very negative, but having a judge, I think, is good. And my father was a judge in my life. And so I'd present to him, he'd say, well, what kind of a person do you want to be? And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that was fine. He didn't, there was no problem there. But he would entertain kind of whatever I'd bring to him. So like, well, I'm thinking about being a doctor, or I'm thinking about doing this, or thinking about being a dolphin trainer, like when I was like in first grade. And he was like, great, what do you want to do to get those skills? And then he would it was so neat too, because I got to explore, at least in my mind, different avenues, different professions. And this isn't just about professions. We talked about school dances. We talked about video games I played, and we talked about church stuff and service opportunities and Boy Scouts and how I was being a brother. Was I being a good brother or a bad brother? Or like, and the questions got more complicated, a little bit more complex and more nuanced as I got older. But having my dad there to go to, where he would encourage my exploration of who I wanted to become, and then using whatever kind of educational framework, and whatever support, I knew he would be there for me, because he cared enough to ask the question, like, who I wanted to become. So I never really felt the need to like rebel, because like my parents had some rules for me, but I felt like I was part of the rule making. Could have been manipulation, or it could have been legit. It felt legit, because they'd say, well, okay, you're doing these things, or you stayed up late, or you didn't call us before you came home. You came home at this time in the morning, and what do you think we should do? And then we'd come to some kind of agreement. So anyway, long story short, just saying, these conversations, you don't have to like 100% decide the destiny of your child. They're human too. They're going to be an adult. They're going to make those decisions. And those conversations are, I think they're beautiful. So.
Yeah. And I think like realizing that technology can be good or it can be bad depending on how you use it. If you are using technology to cyberbully someone, you're not using it in a way that's good for you or for other people. And so understanding that as a tool, you get to decide how you are going to use it. You get to decide if you will use it to do things that better yourself and other people, or you can decide to use it to do things that hurt yourself and other people. And I think having that conversation about technology with our kids is really important to help them understand that technology is just a tool that we use. We use it for so many things. It just, we don't necessarily even think about all the things we were using it for, like we talked about before. But all of us have choices every day about how we use that technology. And if we are going to use it to do something that helps us and helps other people, or if we're going to do it to use something that hurts us or hurts other people. And so having good stewardship and good use of that technology is a principle that you can help give your kids. So then when they grow up, they also think about, how am I using this technology? Is it being used in a way that will help other people or help myself? Or am I just using it in a destructive manner?
Well, right
I
on.
love it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I mean, just you answered everything so in just such an eloquent way, and
You did.
just
Thank you, Melissa, for coming.
it's been great. I did have another question. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, or anything you'd like to say that you haven't been able to say because I was taking too long to say my point?
I don't think so. I'm really happy that you guys were able to have me on. This was a really great experience for me, and I've loved talking with you both today and sharing these things with you. Sorry that I jump in a little too much. I just get so excited because I'm totally passionate about helping kids learn and grow and helping parents learn and grow alongside their kids. I think like for coding and for everything, when people embrace that philosophy of always being somewhere along learning things and knowing that you will never get to a point where you will know it all. I think that's important in coding, that's important in life, and that by taking time to learn from other people who have different knowledge and skill sets and experiences than you do, you're going to be not just a better coder, but also a better person.
Well, thank you so
Awesome.
much. We are going to be posting links in the description. So Pocket Homeschool, any kind of place you'd like to reach out, we're going to go ahead and post those links. If there's somewhere where they can reach out to you, is it the website? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
You can either get a hold of me through my website, which is pockethomeschool.com, or my Facebook page. If you search Pocket Homeschool, you'll find it. And I have an email newsletter where you can get homeschool tips every week. I call it my 5 for Friday. I send out 5 homeschool tips that you can use. And I'll be talking about coding after this episode drops.
Awesome.
So.
Great.
Yeah. Well, we're so happy to have you. So
All right.
thanks again.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll see you later.